In a stunning escalation of economic warfare, President Donald Trump has issued yet another explosive threat, this time targeting the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, with a staggering 150% tariff on their exports. His chilling warning? Any BRICS nation that even dares to discuss alternatives to the US dollar will be hit with crippling tariffs. What's behind this aggressive move? According to Trump, BRICS is actively trying to dismantle the US dollar's global dominance by establishing an independent financial system, one that could potentially bypass America's control and usher in a new world order, free from the US grip. But here's the unsettling question that lies at the heart of this crisis. If BRICS were truly insignificant, why would the US need to escalate its threats to such extremes? If the US dollar were as invincible as Washington claims, why would it be willing to engage in a high-stakes economic war against a group of nations that pose no real threat? The unsettling reality is clear. America is panicking. For over a century, the US dollar has been the uncontested global reserve currency, cementing America's unparalleled power over global trade and finance. This dominance has forced nations worldwide to stockpile US dollars, settle international transactions in USD, and rely on US-controlled financial systems like SWIFT. With this immense power, the US has been able to manipulate global markets, print money without consequence, and impose devastating sanctions on any nation that dares to defy its will. But now, BRICS nations are challenging this long-standing order, and Trump's extreme response reveals just how deep the threat is. This is not just about trade, it's about a tectonic shift in global power dynamics, one that Washington is desperate to prevent at any cost. The petrodollar system, the cornerstone of US dominance. At the very core of America's financial empire lies the petrodollar system. In the 1970s, the US struck a deal with Saudi Arabia to ensure that all global oil transactions would be conducted in dollars. This agreement forced every nation that imports oil to hold significant reserves of USD, artificially inflating the dollar's value and ensuring that global demand for the currency remained high. But now, BRICS is actively challenging this system, and the foundation of the petrodollar is starting to crack. China and Russia have already abandoned the dollar in favor of using their own currencies. Over 90% of their trade now takes place in yuan and rubles. India, meanwhile, has been purchasing Russian oil using rupees, completely cutting the dollar out of energy transactions. Even more alarming, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, two of America's most loyal energy allies, are openly considering accepting yuan for oil sales, signaling that even Washington's historical partners are exploring alternatives to the dollar. This is not just a theoretical shift, this is happening right now. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, has confirmed that the US dollar's dominance on the world stage is steadily eroding. Back in 2000, the US dollar made up over 70% of global reserves. By 2023, that number had plummeted to just 58%, with the decline continuing as more nations seek alternatives to the dollar. Meanwhile, China's digital yuan is already being tested for use in international oil trade, signaling that the days of the US dollar's monopoly over global transactions may be numbered. This marks a monumental shift in the global financial landscape, one that Washington is scrambling to contain. The end of dollar hegemony? If BRICS succeeds in launching an alternative global reserve currency, the consequences for the United States would be nothing short of catastrophic. Washington would lose its most powerful tool of geopolitical leverage, the ability to control global finance through the dominance of the dollar. Without the dollar's central role in international trade, the US would no longer be able to impose sanctions, control capital flows, or manipulate markets as it has done for decades. This isn't just about trade policies. This is about the US fighting to maintain its grip on a world that is increasingly slipping beyond its control. Trump is acutely aware of the stakes. If BRICS continues with its de-dollarization strategy, the global importance of the US dollar will continue to erode, potentially leading to an economic crisis in Washington. After all, America's economy is built on debt that is sustained by the global demand for US dollars. If BRICS and other nations begin trading in their own currencies, the artificial demand for the dollar will disappear, sending inflation in the US skyrocketing and further weakening America's economic influence on the global stage. This is why Trump is so vehemently opposed to BRICS' financial ambitions. The rise of BRICS isn't just about creating an alternative currency. It's about laying the foundation for a world where the US no longer calls the shots. But the question remains, will Trump's economic threats succeed in stopping BRICS, or will they backfire in a catastrophic way? A strategic failure, Trump's 150% tariff threats. Trump has portrayed himself as a tough, unyielding leader, claiming that his economic threats have forced BRICS to back down. But the reality is far more complicated and far more ominous. Rather than causing BRICS to collapse, Trump's tariffs are only accelerating the movement away from U.S. economic dominance. At the 2023 BRICS summit, the group expanded at an unprecedented rate, welcoming 5 new countries, Egypt, Ethiopia, Indonesia, Iran, and the United Arab Emirates, into the fold. This marks one of the largest geopolitical shifts in decades, as more nations turn to BRICS as a counterbalance to the U.S.-led financial order. And this expansion is far from over. Argentina, Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, and Thailand are all actively in discussions to join BRICS, further solidifying the group's influence. Trump's weapon of choice, tariffs, has proven ineffective in the past. In 2018, he imposed tariffs on China, hoping to force Beijing to change its trade policies. Instead, China retaliated, slashing agricultural imports from the U.S. and devastating American farmers. As prices for consumer goods surged and manufacturing jobs dwindled, it became clear that tariffs weren't the silver bullet Trump had hoped for. Now, with his latest threat of a 150% tariff on BRICS nations, Trump is repeating the same strategy. But this time, the consequences for the U.S. economy will be far more severe. The U.S. relies heavily on imports from BRICS countries: electronics, rare earth metals, pharmaceuticals, and agricultural products. If these goods are hit with crippling tariffs, American companies will have no choice but to raise prices, causing inflation to spiral and further weakening the U.S. economy. Meanwhile, BRICS nations have plenty of alternatives. China can shift its exports to Africa and Latin America, while Russia has significantly increased its energy trade with India and the Middle East. Brazil and South Africa, major exporters of food and natural resources, are expanding trade relationships with China and Europe. The U.S., in comparison, is becoming more isolated with every move it makes. Trump's tariff strategy? It's doomed to fail. Rather than weakening BRICS, these tariffs will only push the group to accelerate its plans for economic independence. Each time Washington attacks BRICS economically, the bloc finds new ways to reduce its reliance on the U.S., leaving Washington increasingly powerless. A divided world. The U.S.'s growing isolation. Trump's aggressive tariff policies aren't just failing to weaken BRICS, they're isolating the U.S. from the rest of the world. As BRICS nations strengthen their economic ties, the U.S. is losing influence, even among its closest allies. Take the European Union, for instance. Trump's trade wars with Mexico, Canada, and Europe have pushed these nations to seek alternatives to U.S.-dominated financial systems. The EU is increasingly concerned about U.S. sanctions, and many nations are actively exploring the use of alternative currencies, such as the yuan and euro, for international trade settlements. The EU is growing weary of relying on a financial system controlled by Washington, and countries are beginning to prioritize partnerships outside of U.S. influence. But Europe is far from alone, as China and Russia continue to expand their bilateral trade, reaching a record $240 billion in 2023. The U.S. finds itself on the losing side of history. The U.S. has failed to isolate Russia with sanctions, and India is deepening its energy ties with Moscow, moving away from the U.S.-dominated oil market. Even Africa, long considered an ally of the West, is strengthening its economic ties with China, with trade between the two reaching $282 billion in 2023. This is a world in which the U.S. is no longer calling the shots. Instead of maintaining a powerful, unchallenged economic order, Washington is becoming increasingly isolated on the global stage, and BRICS is thriving in the vacuum that the U.S. has created. The inevitable shift, a multipolar world. So what's next for BRICS? The bloc is no longer simply reacting to U.S. economic threats. They are actively building a financial system that could forever reshape global trade and finance. One of the most significant developments is Russia's proposal for a gold-backed BRICS currency, which could rival the U.S. dollar in international trade. A currency backed by real, tangible commodities like gold and natural resources would offer stability, protection against inflation, and a secure alternative to fiat currencies controlled by Western central banks. China is leading the charge in digital finance. Its digital yuan is already being tested for international oil transactions, proving that the U.S. dollar is no longer the only viable option for global trade. As more countries adopt China's digital currency, the U.S. dollar's dominance is further undermined. The petrodollar system, which has kept the U.S. dollar at the center of global oil trade for decades, is teetering on the brink of collapse. If major oil producers, like Saudi Arabia, Russia, and others, begin accepting payments in yuan instead of dollars, it could signal the end of U.S. economic hegemony. The implications are staggering. A desperate gamble. Will Trump's tariffs work? One thing is certain. Trump's 150% tariffs will not deter BRICS from pursuing its financial independence. If anything, they will only strengthen the bloc's resolve to break free from the US-led economic order. As BRICS expands its financial networks, more countries will join the movement to create a multipolar world, where power is shared among many, not concentrated in Washington. The US is running out of ways to stop this shift. Trump's tariff threats are not a sign of strength. They are a desperate, last-ditch effort to preserve a dying economic system. The US is no longer in control of the global economy, and BRICS is showing that nations can thrive without relying on the dollar. As more countries embrace de-dollarization alternatives, build independent trade networks, and adopt new financial systems, America's grip on global finance continues to slip. The era of US economic dominance is drawing to a close, and the future belongs to a multipolar world led by BRICS. The question remains, how long can the US delay the inevitable? Do you think Trump's tariffs can stop BRICS? Let us know in the comments below. Subscribe, like, and share this video to stay informed on the latest developments in geopolitics, the global economy, and the shifting world order. This is just the beginning. Stay tuned for more in-depth analysis on the changing global landscape.